how did you get to New York City?
I was born here, baby. Mount Sinai.
Your family are long-time New Yorkers. Do you know the family genesis story to moving to New York?
Well, we're not that long-term New York. My parents moved here. So my mom's from Chicago. My dad's from Connecticut. I mean, my dad's family came through in 1898, came over from wherever we came over from. They said that's the old country. We're never going back. So they didn't talk about where we were from or what our name used to be before Morris. But yes, so New York is mostly my parents.
The old country, is that Ireland? Do you know where?
We don't know.
Okay.
We don't know. Vaguely Eastern Europe is what we know from my dad's side.
They came here just looking for a better life. Is it that classic American story, basically?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, and a very kind of American dreamy. They came, and my grandfather, who was the first generation born here, started a company that my cousin now runs, third generation, and yeah, built quite a beautiful and prosperous life.
And I know you're back in New York, but you've lived in many places. Where did you go? Where have you been?
So when I was 18, I moved to Paris and I worked at a cathedral. I worked as a musician and I lived in the bell tower. And then I came back and went to college in the States. And then I was up in Boston. And then I spent summers in London and Madrid and DC and Dongguan, China. I taught English there for a bit, 3 years in Istanbul, back to New York for a little bit of my 20s, then to San Francisco, then to Puerto Rico, and now back in New York again.
Musician, was that a pursuit for your professional career, just more of an interest? What were you doing in Paris?
I grew up singing in a church choir and school choirs, and I always loved having music in my life. And when I was 16, there was a really wonderful a young British man who came over and was assistant director of the choir I was in. And he said, "You have a voice. You should pursue this. You should take opera lessons and do opera auditions." And so I did that a little bit. But truth be told, I considered conservatory, and I always thought, no, I think I want to go to real college. And then I was like, maybe I don't want to do either of these things.
Well, you were considering going into the conservatory.
Yeah, I was. So I thought, but I wasn't super drawn to conservatory. Even at that age, I thought I could recognize that the life of a musician and an artist is very hard. And I thought, I'm not sure I love this enough to want to make this my career. And then I moved over to France, and it was really just, I didn't want to go to college right away. I wanted to explore other things. And I tried to get jobs in other things, but I was 18 years old with no college degree and a very fuzzy visa situation. I found it difficult to get employment, but I could find people to hire me to sing. And so I did end up becoming a musician by default for that year. But I also, I made very little money. I dumpster dove. I worked in a soup kitchen when I wanted like a proper meal. It was it was a thin, but of course, very bohemian and interesting existence as well.
The choice not to pursue that more seriously, was it really just rooted in not having the energy, the drive, the desire to do it? Was it something else?
I can remember very distinctly seeing Anna Netrebko perform. She's an operatic diva, and just realizing I don't have that. I wasn't born with that. I can't get that by work. I am a hard worker and I have some talent, but I'm not a star. I don't think I'm that good. And I think it was just a realistic appreciation. I thought, if I really, really loved this, I could still make a beautiful living as a musician of sorts. But I especially to live a life where you're going to have a very comfortable life, you have to be a star. To be a star, you have to have some amount of talent that I recognize I don't think I have. And so I just thought, I will hopefully become a patron of the arts.
When you decided to switch and go back, it sounds like to the college in the States, did you have a knowledge or a hunch of where you wanted to go? Or was that more of like a nebulous, we'll just go to college and see what happens?
I had no idea. I wish I had. I'm so grateful that I was able to go to college in the States where you don't have to decide right away.
Yeah.
And I remember mapping out I started as a physics major, and then I realized that I probably didn't want to do that. And I remember mapping out all the different majors I could be interested in. And it was like 26 different majors that I thought I could, from Romance languages and literatures to medieval history to statistics. And I ended up studying government, which is sort of just down the middle. I ended up studying government because when I did this regression across all the possible majors, I realized that the physics classes I'd taken and the distribution requirements I'd fulfilled, I only needed to take 7 more classes to finish a government degree. And then I could spend the rest of my college career figuring out other things. So it was sort of the path of least resistance.
And post-college, was your view just, I want to see the world. I want to get out there and go to Turkey, go to China, live everywhere. Where was your head at that point?
I knew that I wanted to be abroad and I wanted to explore. I had, even from that experience of being 18 and being in Paris, and even before that, I'd done some solo international travel before I was 18 as well. And it was, that hazy early 2000s where it was, And also, I mean, so much credit to my parents who have been so unbelievably chill about this stuff. When I was 18 and I said I wanted to go to Paris instead of going to college. And I feel like most people's parents would offer some resistance. And mine were like, well, are you asking us for money? And I said, no, I have some savings. I'd done some weird childhood hustles growing up and had a couple $1,000s. And I was like, and they're like, well, okay, you're 18. Do what you're going to do. So I did.
What was the appeal of the solo travel internationally? I mean, I think that's becoming a little bit more common culturally in the US. I've done a lot of that. Was it more just exploration? Was it mostly just a desire to see other cultures? Where do you see that interest coming from?
I had a lot of curiosity, and I felt like I wasn't convinced that the US was the best place. And I really wanted to experience different cultures and understand what we might be able to do better. And I really was seeking. I was trying to find my passion. I am a hard worker. I'm reasonably smart. And I just thought if I could figure out what I want to do with my life and where I want to be, I'm sure I could do great things. But I would explore something and then I would feel like it wasn't really catching my passion, or I would explore things and realize that I didn't have a great aptitude for them and there were other people who were better, which is great. Like, that's okay. I want to see people. I think everyone, it's the Japanese concept of Ikigai, right? The intersection between what you're good at and what the world needs. And I'm forgetting what the other criteria are, but that's a good way to start, at least.
What you can make a living at. I forget if that's the third angle there. What did you learn from the other cultures? I mean, I think that's a fairly common curiosity among people who take off for other cultures, is what do other cultures do that we can learn from, or are better at than the US? What did you take away from those years?
I think the biggest thing was that there are so many ways to be happy and successful. You don't have to follow a specific path. And I saw this when I got back to university in the States and I encountered all these people who'd just gone straight, had these helicopter parents and had gone straight to college. And, if they got an A-, they were, borderline suicidal. And just their world was going to end. And because I'd had this perspective of living abroad, first of all, I wasn't scared of being an adult. I was like, oh, you figure these things out, show up in Paris, find an apartment on Craigslist or whatever, find what the local equivalent is. It's not that hard. And I also, realized that there was a model of success, which is being a foreign correspondent and living in an interesting place and living in a beautiful historic place in Istanbul and traveling all over the world. And there's also a model of success, which is living in a beautiful rural farm and farming your own food. And there's a model of success, which is being a high-powered lawyer working on international human rights cases, living in London. And all of those were paths that I was interested in exploring.
But keeping your vitality, having an energy about your life. I don't know how you think about success as it applies to people having a life that, is worth living. But to me, it's always struck me that the people I want to emulate are the people that feel very alive. There's like something deeply, they've tapped into their inner vitality in a way that really matters. I don't know how you would encapsulate that or summarize that in your takeaways.
How can you tell that someone's tapped into their inner vitality?
Tough to know, but I think just being around them, there's a sense of aliveness typically about their energy and enthusiasm for being here that I don't know is always present in people I meet who are quote unquote successful in the US.
Sure. I mean, I think the biggest turnoff is someone who complains about their life and does nothing about it, And so, yeah, I mean, I have known people who have very little and are very happy with it. I've known people who have a lot and are not at all. So, inner vitality, or just simply sort of, a good outlook on life and appreciation for what you have is what I look for.
Did you find your Ikigai? Was there during those years, did you feel like you got closer and closer to finding your sweet spot?
I think I did, which is funny because I'm not exactly working in it right now, but it was really wonderful after years of searching. So I had my musician phase. I did various I worked at a university one summer. I worked as a jeweler in London for a little bit. I worked as a journalist in Istanbul. I was briefly at CNN, and then worked as a consultant and doing all of these things were interesting in their own ways, but I didn't see myself making a career out of them. And then I learned how to code, and I started doing hackathons and building things. And then I ended up founding a tech company, which is what I did for 9 years. We made an app called Hitlist that alerted you when flight prices dropped. And I feel very strongly and passionately about using technology to build products that just are net positive for the world and make people's lives better and more efficient. And also fundamentally, my life thesis is that basically I want to give people the tools to travel and move around more, because I believe that interchange between cultures and leads to greater understanding, leads to greater prosperity, and the great evils and the great things that are dragging us down in the world are actually sort of isolation and misunderstanding. And when you interact with a person, when you travel to their culture, or even, when you share a dinner, you are forced to confront that maybe they're not, they don't fulfill these stereotypes that you might have read about in your right wing or left wing media.
You see their humanity.
Yes.
How did you stumble upon the idea for Hitlist? How did that happen? So I had learned to code. I was doing a bunch of hackathons where we sort of... In San Francisco, or where were you?
No, I was living in Istanbul at the time.
Okay.
Yeah. But I also think it's probably instructive that I was around when Facebook was getting started, and I was one of like the first 10,000 users of Facebook, which is funny because they used to do the username serially. So when any developer was building an app, and you import your friend list to the app, I would always be the first one in the API to show up for a lot of people, which was funny. So I watched these technologies transform our world. But from luckily I was close enough to them. I knew some of the people involved, and I had one of my closest college friends also started a tech startup. And this was still when that was really, really, really unusual, especially if you weren't on the West Coast. And so I saw this possibility in building technology that could change everything. So Hitlist, I was always like the travel agent for my friends. So I loved and was very passionate about finding cheap flights. And I was deep in all of the Reddit forums and Lonely Planets forum and all of this stuff. And I found all of the crazy, weird hacks around what's now called skip lagging. It has a name now, but it was that idea of hidden city ticketing where, if you want to buy a ticket to Austin, it's expensive. But if you buy a ticket to Austin or to Phoenix with a stopover in Austin and get off in the middle. Right. So I basically was always finding my friends cheap flights. And in particular, I was always trying to get people to come and visit me in Istanbul. And when I said, come visit me in Istanbul, open-ended thing, relatively few people showed up. But then I started sending them, hey, you should buy a ticket to Istanbul right now because it's only $440 and it's usually $700 plus. So come now. Or even, from my friends coming from London. Oh my God, you can get to Istanbul for £25 right now. Come and visit me this weekend. And overwhelmingly people did. I mean, it had a much higher hit rate. And all of a sudden people started visiting, which made me happy. And also I was like, well, there's something to this, if you help people, everyone's got this vague desire, like, oh, I'd love to see the pyramid someday, or I'd love to go and visit my family in Chicago more often or something. But then if you actually send them an alert that is tailored to them and that understands their context and can say, hey, this is a really good deal. You should book this now.
Now is the time.
Yes. And so that was what Hitlist did at scale. And we managed to work with some with Skyscanner and some big sort of flight search engines. And we helped them develop external APIs and things for what we needed to be able to do this efficiently. And we grew to about 2 million users. And there's still a few, every so often I'll get a DM on Twitter or something like this. When are you bringing Hitlist back? And I'm very proud of what we built. And unfortunately, the company in the pandemic was not a great time to be selling flights. And that spelled the end of the company.
Did you feel like when you were building that was going to be your life's work? That if not with Hitlist specifically, the work of building these sort of efficiency technology companies was going to be what you wanted to do forever?
100%. Yes. And I loved it. And I love it. I mean, I would often say, if I had $1 billion, I would be doing the same thing every day. And when things were stressful, which they often were, I could just, my Zen was literally just logging into like the crunchiest part of our database and watching new users join, which would be like, 20 plus people every minute would be joining. So every couple seconds, I'd see a ping of like this new, and I'm just, oh, someone just joined in Madagascar. Oh, more people in Florida, and there's just some joy knowing that people are finding something and that you are impacting their life as well. And so I absolutely love that. And like I said, the funny thing is I'm not building technology right now, although I do think I am in a very extended research phase to build whatever next technological project I do build. I am writing primarily now. But through writing, I am doing a lot of research, and I find that also very, very fun.
I would love to hear about that transition moment during the pandemic when it closes down and how you transitioned into the next thing. What happened?
Well, March 2020, our revenue went down 95%. And, as a business owner, you always think, okay, there could be a recession, there could be a thing, maybe our revenue would contract 30% or something like this, but you just don't think it's all going to disappear. And so I tried to do as best as I could by the team, but we just didn't have a way to know when we would ever be able to make money again. I didn't want to be selling flights in a time when we had no idea what the implications were. So we even considered literally shutting down the product, but we're like, okay, some people still have to travel for emergencies, for family, things like this, and they should still be able to get cheap flights, And so but the app we no longer had income to pay the team, and we kept it around in maintenance mode. It was in June 2021 that it kind of officially stopped working. The consumer side, there were still a few B2B contracts that we had that we worked on a little bit. And I was in an odd place because I had, at the same time, my mother was diagnosed with esophageal cancer and given a 5% chance of survival. And 2020 wasn't really a walk in the park for anyone, but it was pretty awful. And my brothers and I took turns being basically primary caregivers to my parents while my mom was going through that treatment. Thank God she made it. She's great. She's 5 years cancer free. Sorry, I should have said that sooner. But I ended up, migrating home for a little bit, as many people I think did during the pandemic. And during this time, driving my mom to and from appointments, I did have a lot more time, and I was on Clubhouse. Do you remember that app?
Of course.
Yeah. And so I ended up doing a lot of talks with people, and people kept on being really curious about communal living every time it came up. So I have been living in some form of communal home since 2015. Maybe if you consider my place in Istanbul, where we had constant visitors as well, that also kind of feels like it was just my best friend and I shared a place, and we had 138 house guests in 3 years.
That's so cool.
That was definitely a communal experience. But officially, I lived in a place in 2015 in Gramercy. I got a brownstone with some friends, and we had the top half of the brownstone. We filled it up. Anyway, people were always so curious about this. And I thought, rather than having to talk people through everything, I should just write down some of my learnings. I wrote a Medium post, and it was very well received. And then I reached out to a friend who had also been doing some writing about communal living and said, hey, what do you think about maybe doing a blog? And he said, I'm too busy, but maybe Phil would be interested. So I talked to our other friend, Phil, who I vaguely knew. I didn't know well at that point. And he and his wife had started another communal home themselves in the Bay Area. And he agreed. Always people were asking him questions. I liked his writing style as well. And we said, okay, let's start a blog. If we can both write 3 posts each before, we'll use that as the metric where we agree that we're serious enough about this to actually start. And I don't know if I would have started it. I don't think I would have started it on my own. And I'm very certain it wouldn't be as successful as it has ended up being if I were doing this on my own. So it really helped to have a friend who we edited each other's pieces. We gave each other feedback. We got on some calls, and we ended up publishing, and, we published our sort of intro pieces from each of us. And then we had, a month's worth of content already preloaded. Yeah. So that I think was also very helpful. And so we put it out there and started to see what came back, but very much it was considered a side project. This is something that we do. So we don't have, everyone would write both of us and just be like, hey, my friend wants to start a house and buy a house with friends. Can he talk to you? And, it was really convenient to have a post that we could send, like, well, read this. And if that doesn't answer all the questions, sure, I'll talk to him. And so this side project was something that I ended up working for another startup. Phil was working on other things. It was always just in our free time, but it started to really get some traction. We had some posts that got a lot of readers, and it was also nice within the community of people who live communally. We started seeing these sort of big names that we looked up to subscribe to our blog as well, and just got a lot of good social feedback. I mean, I would be at an event as we started to emerge from COVID, and you start to go to events again. And I would be at Burning Man, and I would meet someone, and they would be like, wait, you're Gillian from Supernuclear? And I was like, this is weird. And so, it just kind of grew a life of its own. And at a certain point, and Phil decided to found a company out of it. So he started a company called Live Near Friends, and they raised a bunch of money. And it is a real estate platform, which is designed for unusual purchase groups. Basically, banks don't want to loan to anyone other than singles or couples. And so when you have a group of friends that's sort of like, oh, well, we're 2 couples and 3 other adults who want to buy this compound, or even this single family home, and split it into and build an ADU and split it, all this, that's very, very hard to finance. You're not going to be able to get a traditional mortgage. So Phil's company does that. Anyway, and I have just found myself writing more and more. We had some publishers reach out. We had TV producers reach out. There's been all of this interest, and now it's become my full-time thing.
How do you define communal living? What does that look? I'm sure it looks like many different flavors, but roughly speaking, how would you define that?
So I take a very broad definition of communal living. I think it just is, you have to intend to live communally, and that is the only thing that defines it. And so you need to want to incorporate other people in your domestic life. That can mean that you all live in the same house together and share a kitchen, which is how I live communally. I live with 6 other adults, and I love that. For this phase of life, it might not be the forever thing, but it can also be, okay, we got a duplex or a triplex, and our friends we each have our own unit, but we're choosing to run this place together, and we try and share some resources. Or it can even be, I just live in this neighborhood and I'm turning my block into a community in a very intentional way, where we share resources and we are actively engaged in each other's life, more than the standard American sort of isolated single family home doing our own thing.
What has worked best for you? I mean, I'm sure everybody is different in terms of what their preferences would look like with this sort of a setup. But for you personally, what has been the sweet spot for how to design a communal life for you over the years?
I have found myself, as I get older, wanting to be smaller. So a lot of people come to me and say, hey, will you manage my communal project? Or will you, or do you want to have a real estate empire, and we'll invest in buildings and build community? And I'm like, absolutely not.
Yeah.
I only want to be involved in the places that I only want to manage the places that I actually live. And I will gladly advise you and give you the tools. But the thing I find so empowering about community is that when your community comes together and makes decisions for themselves. And so I believe the concept of commercially managed co-living, where some investor or management company is building co-living apartments, to be like oxymoronic. It doesn't make sense, because the whole value of community is that whatever resource or abundance comes from you guys sharing space is something that you get to benefit from. And if you have an investor who is trying to, shove more people into his building and call it co-living, and then siphoning off the profits from that is not co-living. That is not communal living.
I'm sure people ask you this a lot, but typically, how well do you feel like you should know the people that you decide to live with communally? I mean, in your experience, it sounds like you've had an interest in making those communities a little bit smaller for you over the years. Do these typically, are they your best friends before you move in? I'd love to hear about the vetting process and just how you think about that aspect of the design.
That's such a great question, because it is, I think, a very common misconception. A lot of people, I think their barrier is like, oh, well, I would want to do this with my best friends, but he's locked into a mortgage and she's got to be near this job, which is in a different neighborhood from what I want to live in, so they're blocked on this. I do think I have lived with people, and I have embarked on projects with people that I don't know that well before. And what happens, there are a few things that can happen. A, you guys are on the same page and everything works out really well. B, you realize that there are differences that you need to work on, and you figure out and you learn and you grow from that. And C, you figure out that there are differences that are not navigable, and you learn from that and you figure out an exit plan. And that's all fine. I've lived with people where it's, we've ended up having different preferences or standards for noisiness or cleanliness or things like this. And you just learn from that. And it didn't mean that they weren't a joy to live with in a lot of aspects, but you realize that this is not a good long-term fit. And then you make other plans, and that's totally fine. And we got to share a chapter of our lives and have a good connection. And I know what I can trust and do with that person and I know what is not aligned, you know? Like I briefly lived in this place in San Francisco full of incredibly bright and creative, wonderful people who also like to do this like beats and coding where they would just be playing EDM music and coding at like 11 p.m. And I really love to sleep at 11 p.m. And that's just not, and that's okay. Like there are enough people who do actually want to do beats and coding at 11 p.m. that they can fill a house with those in San Francisco. And I went and found somewhere else to live, and that's totally fine.
Did you ever find that in the moments where there was like an irreconcilable difference, like the example you just gave, it's a bitch to move for a lot of people. And that, you know, you were like, to hell with this concept. It's given the risk, it's just not worth continuing to iterate and try. Obviously, I think the answer is probably no, but how did you work through that?
So, okay, this is a fun thing. Every so often I have these moments where I realize how radically different my life is from most people's lives. For example, my friend was talking about moving and how draining it was to move. And I realized that I have never moved I've never had to pack up furniture and put it in storage or things like this. I have generally moved into places that were already furnished and or I've furnished them, but when I've moved on, someone has wanted to move in and keep the furnishings. So I've never had that friction the way a lot of people do. So most communal places, there is going to be some degree of stuff already there. And I also, through traveling around a lot, I'm not that attached to possessions. I have a few more now, but it's wonderful to move into these homes that have libraries full of books, and I can add a few books to the bookshelves, but there's also so much more than I would have on my own. And, you know, I don't need to buy all of my own stuff because most of it is already there. So moving isn't hard for me. And I have, I've been the one to leave places, and I've also of course, there are times when someone doesn't work out. And as someone who has been, in most cases, in a lot of the communal living situations, I've been on the lease or one of the co-owners of the property or something. So sometimes we do have to make a decision that, okay, this isn't a fit. But, you know, usually they're not having to uproot their entire life. They're just having to pack up their clothes.
That kind of flexibility to be malleable and to change and to move on if it's not working out and have it not be that big of a deal. Is it your view that that's the default human state typically, or that because we're in the culture we're in, there's this resistance to change, that people just get beaten down, they buy too many things, and they aren't open to iterating their life in the way that it sounds like you almost enthusiastically embrace?
I mean, 100%. I think most people are owned by their possessions.
For sure.
And I feel like that is, I don't mean to discredit if you are the type of person who treasures your collection of creepy dolls or whatever like this. You know, I'm happy for you. But I think a lot of people acquire things just because they think they have to. And I also know a lot of people who've reached a phase in their life where they're like, I'm just getting rid of everything and going to be a nomad. This happened a lot during COVID, but I've seen people do it before and after as well. And it's so liberating to realize the most important things by far, hopefully, are your relationships, are your friendships, are your family. And it's, you know, I mean, I also have friends who lost everything in the LA fires, and it's heart-wrenching to have it taken away when you're not expecting it. But at the same time, you realize the important things are the people who will look out for you and the relationships. And through living communally, I've had the incredible richness of getting to know hundreds of people over the years and all of these different places I've lived, and where, you know, we see each other before coffee in the morning, or, you know, after we've brushed our teeth at night or something. And it's such a shortcut to intimacy and trust. And in a world where you have greater trust, you have a lot more freedom.
In some ways, this seems like it's essentially inverting a lot of the American values, from my perspective in a very positive way. Do you think about that consciously, that with the minimalism materially comes the freedom to, as you just said, I think very well, the option to, or the ability to prioritize what I think the evidence is showing people actually care about at the end of their life, which is their relationships with other people?
Let's talk about American values. I think this is an interesting point you bring up because, the myth, at least, of America is a place that, people came to when they were fleeing persecution and they had to make a new living, and it was was built by immigrants, and it was a melting pot where diverse religious views were tolerated rather than persecuted. Obviously, America has not lived up to these dreams, but these are the values that I think I was taught growing up. And I feel like this drive towards individualism, that you need to own your own home to be successful, is a really recent phenomenon. And when I say recent, I mean the last 100 years. But when I think about the course of American history, I think there's also, the idea of going out and homesteading, but you were building with other people. You would have barn raisings, where everyone gets together and helps, the entire community helps each individual family raise their barn. Are you familiar with this concept?
Yes, yeah.
So it's funny. There's a new communal house that just came together in Brooklyn, and on Thursday they're hosting a barn raising, and a bunch of us are coming, and it's fun. We're like, oh, we can give them this extra trash can we don't need, and this extra coffee table, and these art that we've never found a place for on our walls. And there's going to be that, to me, is the American values and spirit that I believe in and think is the way that we, build back a better nation from this incredibly divided and fractured way we are right now.
What do people typically say who make this shift from living alone or living with a small group of people into a communal space? And I would imagine it's your view that it's not necessarily for everyone, but for the people that it has really resonated with and has helped, what have they gained?
It's funny because I do think a lot of people come into communal living out of a time of crisis. So a lot of people will come in the wake of a bad breakup, or they've been laid off from their job, or something has happened that has forced them to reconsider a lot of things in their life. And they think of it as a temporary thing until they get on their feet and they're going to go back to whatever the norm is. And overwhelmingly, in almost every case, I think they find they love it, because humans are social creatures. And to be clear, it doesn't mean that you're around people all the time. I like my privacy. I like having my room as my sanctuary that people don't come into, and I get plenty of alone time. But I also love that I don't have to plan if I want to, if I want to eat with people. Usually there are people around to do that with. If I want to talk through something that's on my mind, there are people easily accessible. I don't have to make a coffee date and travel to a different part of town or schedule something 2 weeks in advance. And that frictionless connection to people is a beautiful thing. And most people I've seen experience this don't really want to go back.
It's almost like, I would imagine for many of these people, they need the permission to be able to do it. And then once that is granted, maybe that it just becomes clear to them that this is the preferred lifestyle for them.
Yeah. And I think also those people who transition out of it look back on it with a lot of nostalgia, but think, oh, but we can't do this now because we need to be here for our jobs, or we need to do, in this different place. So this is why I write Supernuclear, is to try and show people that there are so many different models for this. Communal living doesn't have to be just the Berkeley student co-ops or something like this. And also, some people experience communal living and they're like, I couldn't possibly do this again. In fact, most Americans will experience communal living in college, or maybe in their early 20s, when they can't afford a place of their own. They have roommates or, college dorms. And some people have great experiences. Some people have horrendous experiences. And then they index on that. They say, oh my God, I could not wait to get my own place because I had this horrendous roommate who stole my, would always finish the milk and would always leave dirty dishes in the sink and all of this. The thing is, they're indexing on behavior of a 20-year-old to inform the rest of their life. They don't realize that actually, if you live with adults who have grown up to be more conscientious people, you generally have a much better experience and end up with just like, you don't have tragedy of the commons, you have abundance of the commons.
To me, this is one of the great tragedies of life, of people not having a healthy model for an alternative option to change and to improve their life. And I wonder if there are, generally speaking, at roughly our age, people that have had careers that have some degree of disposable income that could live alone if they wanted to. What typically is the best model, if there is one, for people that do want to live communally that you've seen worked very well? As you just said, I think you have your own floor. You were mentioning that you have the ability to be alone if necessary.
Absolutely.
What is that model, if there is one? What does that typically look like?
So I think a level of communal living that almost everyone is comfortable with is the idea of, I have my own apartment, or I have my own house on a cul-de-sac, or I have my own apartment in a building that my friends also live in. And I think that's great. And I think we should aim for that more. And I think a lot of times when people are looking to move, they're optimizing for, which has, marble countertops that I like, or this unit has, a good view. And I'm like, do you not realize that, sure, all of those things will bring you little amounts of joy, but do you not realize how much more joy you will get from living next to your friends? And so I feel, people are choosing based on these really like out of touch notions of what's going to make them happy.
I think part of what interests me about this is I almost started my own separate show about the male loneliness epidemic. And just the problem of general isolation. But I think this is typically a bigger problem for guys than it is for women. And I wonder if you've thought at all about this and how this sort of redesign of a lifestyle might be particularly beneficial for men specifically.
Oh, I love that you brought this up because it's true. I do think there is huge societal pressure on all American adults to get your own place because that's how you're successful. I think there's definitely more pressure on men for this. And like I've said, I've seen people get into this really, they see it as a temporary thing. I have a friend who, in the wake of a divorce, he ended up getting a roommate because he basically kind of needed help paying the mortgage. Yeah. And he saw it as a transition phase. And now 2 years later, he's still living with the roommate. He said, it's so fun. It's great. It's not like they're best friends or they hang out all the time, but they do each other little favors. They help each other out. They occasionally have a meal together. And that's so unusual for men and for a lot of adults. And we hear about this loneliness epidemic about, it's living on your own is as bad for your health as smoking 17 cigarettes a day. I might be misquoting that, but it's like ballpark like that. And it's true. And as people get older, you're more than twice as likely to die from deaths of despair and also huge implications for heart disease, all this type of stuff. So I do think that men are pressured more to have their own places, but actually need this connection more than even, I don't want to draw any gross stereotypes, but I think it's just men are going to find these casual connections. I think a lot of men outsource their social lives to partners. Absolutely. And if they find themselves on their own, can just kind of become more and more insular and more susceptible to the manoverse and becoming radicalized and doing, becoming crazy shooters. So, or incels or any of these other things, which are mostly male phenomenon.
Healthy in general.
Indeed. So I do think, we should talk about this more, and there should be more encouragement of male friendship. And I think I think that we should live. Some people talk about having mommunes, single moms getting together. And I'm just like, I respect to that, but I don't want to live in a mommune. I want to live in a commune with both male and female and whatever other genders want to be there, and having multiple influences on the children. I think it's really useful. We
were talking about this before we started recording, but I mean, at root to me, a lot of this is the question of what is human nature? What were we really, quote unquote, designed to? How were we designed to live? What is our evolutionary history? I'm sure you have done plenty of homework on this, but when people ask you that and how it aligns with what these models look like that you are offering to the world, I'd love for you to contrast that with the contemporary common way that, especially Americans, but generally I think Westerners, how they're living. How are we designed to live in your mind?
I mean, we are meant to live in tribes. Everyone says it takes a village to raise a child. But most people, especially most parents in America, aren't living in villages. And a village doesn't have to mean, we have a town square and a fence and we're rural or something like this. I think you can have villages within neighborhoods. You can have villages within an apartment building. But we are meant to have multiple people involved in raising the next generation. We're also meant to have multiple people who are deeply intimate friends in our lives. And I'm not talking about polyamory, although that's fine too if you want that. But, for those who don't, also just having multiple intimate relationships with people, and I mean emotionally intimate. Esther Perel is a great writer about relationships. She's a therapist, and she talks a lot about this notion that we've narrowed in that your partner needs to be your sexual partner, your romantic partner, your business partner, your roommate, and your buddy, and all of this.
Confidant, everything.
And that's way too much pressure to put on one person. And we're meant to live lives with rich connections, and maybe the person who is your partner in romance and sex and raising your children is not that eager to hear about the office gossip. And that's okay. Like, he doesn't have to be all of that as well. Find a friend who wants to talk about that with you, or, any spectrum along this. Like, we are meant to have other significant others. That's a great book that was written by a woman named Raina Cohen, expanding on this idea about, like, we can have close friendships who help each other. And, also putting all your eggs in one basket with a single partner, and awful things can happen. They could get hit by a bus. They could get cancer. They could end up having a reason that they need to move to the opposite side of the country, and you might have a really compelling reason that you want to stay here. And if all of your life is bound up in one other person, it's very, very unstable. And you can have, there's a really beautiful story of a woman named Logan who lives with Phil, my co-author, in San Francisco. And she and her husband was diagnosed with cancer and ultimately ended up needing to have part of his leg amputated. And it was just a wrenching time in their lives. And Logan said she was looking at this future of her husband being at the hospital and her coming home and, eating a box of pizza alone in her apartment. And Phil and Kristen, Phil, my co-author, and his wife, invited them to move into their community where they'd have their own unit, their own apartment in the complex, but she could be around other people and they all could help out with, picking up groceries for them and just being emotional support while she was going through while she and her husband were going through the agony of his cancer treatment.
For people that hear this or come across your work and this really resonates for them, like this is something they may actually want to consider, what is the best first step to trying to and again, let's say somebody lives in a city, they live alone, they would like to have this more community spirit in their life. What are some ways they can begin to potentially identify active communities that they could join? Is there a most efficient way to begin to locate that?
So there is a great website. It's ic.org, which is the Foundation for Intentional Community. They have a lot listed, but I also think that there's this notion, you can get your friends to become your neighbors, get your friends to live near you, or turn your neighbors into your friends and actually get to know your village. So there's this group called the Neighborhood Village Project, led by a woman named Savannah Kruger, and she actually does these this accelerator cohort on teaching people skills for how to connect with their neighbors. And, I feel like some people might think, oh, that sounds cringe. You should be able to do this on your own. But no, it's brave to reach out and connect with other people. And it really helps to have support from a community and tips and techniques for how to do that. And, so you can also just Google, there's a lot of information out there. We always say, but Supernuclear is our blog. We write about this a lot. But Google co-living San Juan and you'll find Casa Tirona, my place, which has been a gateway drug to co-living for many people, actually, because I think what's nice about our complex in San Juan is, so I lived in Puerto Rico for 5 years and I still split my time with there. And, there are 2 1-bedroom apartments, 2 3-bedroom apartments, and a 7-bedroom house. And most people say they want a 1-bedroom apartment to themselves, but they like that they're part of a community. The funny thing is, once they live there, almost everyone wants to move into the 7-bedroom house because they realize, well, first of all, it has the nicest kitchen and the nicest, but it's nice to have that frictionless way. And there's still, all the rooms still have a decent amount of privacy and stuff, but to be able to frictionlessly interact with people rather than being, off in the corner in your 1-bedroom when you can't tell when people are hanging out or when things are going on in the same way.
Last question I would love to ask you is, and maybe this would have been a better question to the one that I just asked you prior, but for someone who does resonate with this message, what would be your first suggestion to them? Would it be probably to try to be socially a bit more brave and get to know their neighbors? Do you think it's probably worth looking into these existing intentional communities where they can find more of a sense of community? What have you found is typically the first best step for people that again resonate with the ideas that we've been talking about today?
I would say start by having meals with people, hosting a dinner party or a brunch, or, building up this muscle of being, sharing day-to-day life with people through the most common thing that everyone does, which is eat. And, well, I mean, maybe the most common thing is sleep, but anyway, both. And, so can start there. I just had a brain fart. Can you repeat the question?
Just the first suggestion that you would offer to somebody who is interested in beginning to change their life a little bit in the direction of the ideas that we've been talking about today.
So, just find ways to do the things that you're already going to do in your day, like eating with other people. So share a meal, have people over to dinner, host a potluck brunch. Potluck brunch is so easy. Someone can pick up orange juice. Someone can pick up bagels. It's just simple. You make eggs. Great. You're done. And, then there's also, did you enjoy having roommates at some point in your life? Have you enjoyed ever getting a group house with friends and getting a beach house in the summer or something like this? If that's something that you've ever enjoyed, do more of it. Get a house with friends for a weekend, go upstate or something like this. And you start to build up that muscle and you start to figure out okay, this person is a really close friend of mine, but actually they drive me nuts because they are very inconsiderate about noise late at night or something like this. And that's fine. You can be friends with people who you shouldn't live with. On the other hand, you might discover that this person that you're not that close with, someone that you just met, you invite them over to dinner and they stay late and they clean the dishes and they're just a joy to be around. And you're like, oh, this is good. Let's do more of this. So these little moments, you practice and you start to build trust and you start to build an understanding of who would make sense to do this with. And then honestly, you can join a community or create your own. And this is what we're trying to make easier with Supernuclear. just write down what you're interested in. My first communal house in New York came from a Facebook post that I wrote. And I just said, I want to be able to have a house where I can have people over for dinner and we can host concerts and we can do these things. I can't afford a place big enough to do that in New York. But if we take a 1-bedroom budget times 5, look at these crazy places we can get.
Yeah.
And I just shared that publicly. I shared that interest and people really, really resonated with it. And that was how it all started.
Yeah. This sounds to me like basically a form of rebelliousness against all of the sedating incentives of modern life in many ways. I think it's brilliant. Thank you.
That's a very eloquent way of putting it. Thank you.
Appreciate you doing this.
Yeah.